right, this is feedback in motion, stories, strategies, and self-reflection. I want to talk about what makes feedback meaningful, intentional, how to give good feedback, avoiding pitfalls of bad feedback, navigating subjectivity, and building a culture of feedback at your workplace. I am Margaret McKever. I'm based out of Phoenix, outside of Phoenix, Arizona, Tempe. I've been working in software for about 10 years. Currently, I do ensemble/mob programming full time. Some experiences that influence me and my approach to working in software and how to give good feedback, how to have open communication with people, teaching myself how to write HTML as a preteen for Neopets and building fake websites for my hobbies. In high school, I became a peer mentor and I learned how to mediate conflict both formally and informally. I did a plethora of acting in my teens, musical theater as a lowly chorus member. I also did acting in my 20s, some short films, including 72-hour film festivals. I was a Toastmaster for 2 years. I was secretary and vice president of my Toastmasters Club. And most critically, playing exclusively single-player video games collaboratively with my brother my entire life, which arguably set me up for success in the job that I currently have, mob programming remotely. Now, I would like to use a tool called Menti to get a little input from the group of you. So I'm curious to know, do you work remotely or in person, and what type of role do you have? So let's switch over to Menti. All you have to do is go to menti.com and then enter in the code here. And we'll go to our first question. So do you work remotely, in person, or some other combination? Nice, mostly remote, and then one person hybrid. I'm curious, not to put you on the spot but for the person who's working hybrid, did you start out remote and then had to go back to hybrid?
Hi, that was
You want to
me.
speak up? That was you.
Yeah, originally we were in person. I like boomeranged. I left for a year and I came back during the pandemic and we were fully remote. But we still have an office, so we're not required to go in. But I
Oh,
live really close, so I kind of have the best of both worlds. So we can go in for like
nice.
project planning.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. All right, so it does look like the majority of us are remote, and then 2 of us are hybrid. So a lot of time spent online, some time in person. I'll have some suggestions for both types of workplaces. Okay, what type of role do you have? Are you an individual contributor with no direct reports? Do you have direct reports or in some other type of managerial role? Or are you even a manager of managers? Nice. So far, a lot of individual contributors. That's great. Oh, perfect. I'm actually kind of glad. No offense if anyone else is a manager and they haven't selected their role here. Awesome. I do think as an individual contributor, sometimes people think that your opinion doesn't matter, or that your feedback maybe doesn't matter, especially to people above you, but I disagree very much. So we'll talk a little bit about, feedback laterally, of course, but then also going up. Okay, let's go back to our slides. This might seem obvious, but I wanted to take a minute to talk about what feedback really is. And I actually like the definition on Wikipedia. So I'll just read it. Feedback occurs when outputs of a system are routed back as inputs as part of a chain of cause and effect that forms a circuit or a loop. Ideally, the feedback that you get helps you improve or change, grow, and then that opens you up for more feedback that can then continue to help you grow. I think all of the best feedback is about growth and being the best that you can be. And I think any feedback that you offer should be from that place of trying to help that person become the best they can be. Feedback is a gift of insight, even if someone's a jerk and they give you feedback that you don't agree with. Try to change your mindset to at least appreciate it for what it is, which is that person going out on a limb to try to offer you some insight. One really important thing is that feedback is subjective. It is not objective, right? It is from the point of view of that other person, their subjective view. Feedback, when received, I think it should be honored, but it doesn't have to be adhered to. It's okay to disagree with feedback that you get. We'll talk about that a little later. But it should at least be honored for what it is that it came to be. And lastly, feedback loops are ideal for continuous improvement. So let's level set. I want to give you guys a lot of suggestions for how to give and receive good quality feedback and tell you stories about some times in my life where I've had good and bad feedback. But I really want to start by considering good and bad contexts for feedback. Before you even think about how to give good quality feedback or how to improve the type of feedback you give, I think you should think about the context. So before requesting feedback from somebody, you should consider if you are in a good headspace to accept feedback, because you are not required to be. If somebody requests, like if they offer feedback, say, oh, can I give you some feedback? You can say, no, thank you. You can say, no, thank you. Let's pick this up in a week. You can say, no, thank you. Let's email about it later. But you don't have to accept any feedback at any moment if you're not in the mood to. Can you assume positive intent with this person? So this is about considering the person that might be offering you feedback. If you have that kind of trust relationship with them, that you can really take their feedback with positive intent, because it could be critical. And then can you take their input in good faith, right? A little bit different than just the positive intent. Do you trust that that person wants to see you grow and improve? Before offering feedback to someone else, a lot of these are similar just from your point of view as the person offering, right? Do you know if that person's open to feedback? Have you asked them? Are you in an appropriate place to give feedback? Maybe you want to go on a separate call if you're remote or hybrid. If you're in person, maybe you want to pull them away and say if you want to talk in another meeting room or in a hallway. Do you have enough trust built up that if you offer this feedback, no matter how good-hearted it is, that they can take it as a positive thing, at least with good intent? And are you able to find empathy for this person? So if you have some sort of feedback that maybe is really critical, are you able to open your heart to have empathy for that person receiving that maybe hard to hear feedback? So now that we've level set about the context, let's talk more about what makes good feedback. So in Toastmasters, when you give a speech in a meeting, they give you feedback immediately. People are given cards and they fill out feedback in a form that you get immediately, probably minutes. Probably the length of time you speak, you get all of your feedback back in that length of time. So timely feedback is really important, not just so that the experience, the act that that person has that you're giving feedback is fresh in their mind, but also so that there's enough time to change. If somebody gives you feedback like a month after you did something, that's not that helpful because you had this whole month that you could have been improving, right? So, giving feedback in a focused way, so you're just sticking to one specific behavior at a time. I think about this with mediation. There's this concept of fair fighting. So you only want to focus on one thing at a time. As the stereotype of it at home might be one person says, you never empty the dishwasher. And the other person says, well, you always leave your dirty clothes in the laundry. That's not fair feedback. And that's not good, or that's not fair fighting. And it's not good feedback because you have to stay focused on the single thing at hand. It's important to be curious, asking before making assumptions, maybe clarifying what their intention was or what their goals were. I've definitely tried to offer feedback to somebody and then after was told like, oh, I actually wanted to do it that way on purpose for this reason. I was like, oh my gosh, all my feedback, that was horrible because I assumed that wasn't what they wanted to do. So be curious about what that person's viewpoint is and where they're coming from. And of course, be supportive. You're offering feedback because you want to help. You think that your viewpoint can help that person improve or grow. And feel free to ask for ways to, feel free to have a dialogue about how you can support them. You'll also want to make sure that you are respectful. I think it helps to use I language. This is like a classic, um, like good way of talking with other people broadly, not just when it comes to work, but using I language. I noticed this happen, or I observed this behavior, as opposed to saying, you screwed this up, or you did a bad job. Offering alternatives can be a really good approach as well, especially if you see a certain way that they could grow. So if they are, giving a speech in Toastmasters and they have a lot of filler words, maybe you can say, oh, if you're having a tough time just not saying filler words, instead try taking a breath. That can help. That type of constructive, alternative, collaborating, right? Feedback should be relational. I think one of the things I struggle with the most in giving feedback is that friction. When you go out on a limb and offer someone feedback, there's a chance that there can be friction and that they bristle at your feedback, and that can be really intimidating. But I think as long as it's with somebody that you trust or on the way to trust, don't fear the friction, because that discomfort can build trust. I also think effective feedback has space to be reflective. So asking for feedback on the feedback, clarifying, does this make sense? Is what I'm suggesting make sense to you? Or how is this landing? I think that can help with the continuous improvement, and also just being curious, right? Okay, let's talk about what makes feedback ineffective. If feedback is too vague or it's inactionable, then that can't help that person grow. Feedback that can't or doesn't lead to change on that person might not be the best feedback to give. I would suggest that you consider coming up with a way that it can become actionable. Insincere feedback is not useful or helpful. I think there's two types of that. One is like brown nosing, so using positive feedback to curry favor, or you know, appeasing, trying to appease someone's ego. Then there's also kind of the opposite, political feedback, where maybe you are criticizing that person behind their back and being nice to their face, or not actually wanting to sincerely help their growth. Avoidant feedback, I also think we should talk about more broadly, withholding feedback to avoid discomfort, right? So that might be where somebody is doing something that really rubs you the wrong way and could be better, but you keep biting your tongue because you are worried about actually bringing it up. Finally, harsh or personal. It's really important when giving feedback that you don't conflate that person's behavior with their character. There could be a lot of different reasons why somebody is behaving in a certain way, and it's important that you just focus on just that behavior in isolation when giving feedback, and not making assumptions about why it's that way, or that they're a jerk, or that they're a terrible person, right? Okay, let's go back to Menti. Now that we've talked about feedback, I'm curious to hear, do you feel like you get good feedback at work? Do you feel like you give good feedback at work? And what could be preventing you from getting or giving good feedback? So let's go back to the Menti. Nice. A lot of people so far saying that they wish they got more or different feedback. Oh, I get basically no feedback. That must be really hard. Because how can you know if you're accomplishing your goals or the goals of your company or organization? Let's wait just another minute in case anyone else wants to vote. Okay, I'm pleased for the person who gets the amount and quality of feedback that they get. I think we'll be able to talk about that more a little later. Okay, let's go to the next one. So thinking about the type of feedback that you get, what about the type of feedback that you give to others? Wow. Wow. Everyone. But that's good. That means that everyone is at least trying to give feedback and sees the room for growth. That actually makes me really glad. It would make me sad if there were people that said that they don't give any feedback. So this is a good place to start. Lastly, going out on a limb, if you feel comfortable sharing, what do you think is preventing you from getting or receiving, sorry, oh, I typed that wrong, from getting or giving good feedback? Ooh, more senior coworkers having very strong opinions. I have a story about that. Time constraints. Oh, two about time constraints. Too focused on work. It can be hard to make time. Fear of an emotional response. Oh, retro. Okay, I am talking about retro. Lack of courage, question mark. That could be. These are great responses. Oh, a culture of good enough. Oh, that's really interesting. So like maybe an individual is like, I want to be better, but it doesn't really matter if I try to be better because my organization doesn't care that I'm better. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, giving feedback. Um, so the actual act of giving feedback. I think somebody actually said in the mentee, don't want people to be unhappy if you give critical feedback, fear of an emotional response. So let's talk about that a little bit. Um, it can be really hard, the fear of giving feedback, especially if it's a hostile or lousy work environment that people maybe won't be receptive or might automatically shut down if you try to offer feedback. Um, I think sometimes a good soft way to start, which is actually something I learned from Kelly, who's a colleague of mine, asking, do you mind receiving feedback from me? Or even, are you open to feedback? And even if that person says, I don't want to receive feedback from you, I feel like even that question is, in a weird way, a little bit of subtle feedback because you're inviting that person to have that open dialogue and telling them that you care enough that you want to give them feedback. So that could be the kind of thing where even if they say no, maybe keep trying, and maybe eventually they'll be like, okay, yeah, I'll receive some feedback from you. Offering feedback and it doesn't land right is really scary, because you don't necessarily want to backpedal. I think in situations like that, it's important to be curious and ask that person about how they're feeling about it. Like if you are giving feedback and somebody has an emotional response, you want to empathize with that person, right? And think about, if you were receiving critical feedback, how would you feel, right? I've definitely cried at work getting feedback, and it doesn't feel good on either side of the table, I'm sure. So I think that can be one approach. How to salvage is trying to empathize with that person and seeing if there is a way that you can continue to have a dialogue to find more understanding and maybe drilling down more in a more focused way on the feedback that you're giving. What happens if you get feedback that you don't agree with? I think it's allowed if you get feedback that you think you're like that, I don't want this at all. You can pull a little Marie Kondo and you can take the feedback and say, thank you, and let it go. And that's appropriate. I think it's important to at least honor the feedback, even if you don't want to make that change that was suggested. But it's also important to just allow that feedback to marinate a little bit and sitting with it. I think that's okay and appropriate. I have a couple techniques that might help with giving feedback, um, especially to make sure that things are um, acknowledging their subjective nature while trying to come up with a way that is like neutral for that person receiving it. So there's something called SBI feedback, which stands for situation, behavior, impact. And to be honest, when I first heard about SBI feedback, I thought it was kind of corny. It seemed kind of corporate-y, and I really wrote it off. But then I realized that the way that I like to approach feedback organically is thinking about the context, setting the stage, describing or talking about the act that you're giving feedback on, and then the outcome of that act in that context, which is essentially SBI feedback. So the situation at hand, the behavior that occurred, and then the impact, what happened. So one example might be when you speak over David in the call, I can't hear what either of you are saying, which is hard, especially when I'm trying to do what David's suggesting. So that might be an example of SBI feedback, right? You say, like, here's the thing that happened. This was the way that I was impacted by it. And so for this, if I were to give a suggestion, I would say, um, if you're really eager to say something, maybe wait 10 seconds and then you could say, so we can make sure we can hear the person talking. So there's one example of that. Another example is you were so positive and helpful at the department open space. It made me feel really welcome, even though I was one of the only virtual attendees. Thank you. Quick sidebar. Thanking is a really good idea when giving feedback. I think also receiving feedback, but when you're giving feedback, thank them, right? Okay. Anyway, back to this. So here's another technique called the feedback sandwich, where you give a piece of positive feedback, then a criticism, then positive again. However, I actually don't like this and I don't recommend it. I've heard it called the bleep sandwich because it's like two nice things and then something in the middle that's icky. Um, I think sometimes it can, using this technique can lead to some insincerity because it requires a certain number of positive feedbacks and then you like hide your mean feedback instead of actually coming up with something productive or actionable. So the example I have of like poor feedback sandwich, your slide deck theme was awesome. Your presentation was really lousy and it didn't convey any of the important information that our stakeholders wanted to know, and now they're freaking out about the deadline. But the font size of your titles was perfect, right? So this is not really that useful of feedback, right? I would say if you wanted to take something like this into something more actionable, I would say your presentation looked really great, but there were a couple key missing pieces of information that was really important. And because of that, we have some misunderstandings amongst our stakeholders. So feedback sandwich, don't recommend. I would say it buries the lead. Focus on the actual core piece of feedback that you want to give. Okay, let's go back to the Menti. Now that we've talked about some feedback techniques, I would be curious, sitting here now with what we've been talking about, what is a piece of feedback that you would give to somebody in your life, either at work or maybe you volunteer somewhere or maybe a family member, but see if you can take something that's been bothering you and if you can put it into an actionable, concise piece of feedback. Then when everyone's posted, we'll all have a whole plethora of examples to learn from. And I'm doing one too. So while we're working on these, oh, nice, we're getting some responses already. Yay. I realized I wanted to tell a story earlier that I forgot about. Let me see if I can find it. Um, so about the avoidant pitfall of feedback. I was once on a team. I was like a more junior person, and I had a more senior person, and then like a distinguished engineer on the team. And I decided I wanted to try to test drive a feature. So I wanted to write code that helped me figure out how to get the feature working. And it was really fun. I'd never really done it before. And it really came together, and I was like, wow, this is really doing what I need to do. And so I did the push request, or I did the push. So then my distinguished engineer had the pull, and I was waiting to sit with him and talk to him about it. And I didn't hear from him. He went into a meeting with the more senior engineer for like 3 hours. And then later, like at the end of the day, she came out to me and said that the tests I wrote were not what the team was expecting or used to, and it wasn't like the way that they like tests. And so then she's the one that sat with me for like an hour after to like help me figure out the test. To be fair, the test could definitely have been one or maybe two cases. It was like 18 tests. But that distinguished engineer, he didn't have the heart to tell me to my face that these tests were subpar. He like passed the buck on to this person that was more senior to me, but more junior to him. And that really hurt because I had a really good relationship with that distinguished engineer, and it was rough. Okay, let's see. Oh, we have some really good ones. Oh man, can I hide this? There we go. Oh, these are really good. Oh, I like this one about the code, especially because you offering an alternative, right? Instead, could you remove this in the future? That's great. I also like this one during heated project discussions. Interrupting and talking over makes it difficult for others to understand what we're trying to achieve. Also, this one's good. Are things okay? Is there anything I can do to help? There's a concept of subtle feedback, and that's a really great one. Are things okay? How are you? What are you thinking about? Is there anything I can do to help? Awesome. Thank you so much. These are great. And now we all have had these examples that we can learn from as well. All right. So feedbacks one-to-one is a little bit different than feedbacks in groups. So let's talk about that. So feedback loops within teams. I think in the Menti, somebody commented about retros. So I was just curious, like for people here that do retrospectives, um, that is ideally a really great way to create a feedback loop in your team. The whole concept of your team reflecting on the work that you had done in the last week or the last sprint, collectively coming up with something that you can do better, and then acting on it in the next week or sprint or whatever time frame. However, I've definitely experienced this where sometimes the retro is more of a ceremony instead of like an actual like living vibrant. Yeah, Leslie, I see you nodding. That is such a thing that happens, and it's a real shame. So I would challenge you to see if you can try to reclaim your team retrospective for feedback. At the very least, it can be an opportunity for you to be upfront with the things that you see that you or the team could do better. So even if the very first time, doesn't build this culture of feedback, at least you can start doing these little steps and signaling to your teammates that you are interested in feedback and in growth. I also think it can be really helpful to be open to team feedback outside of meetings. I've definitely been in teams where you have the meeting, and then when everyone leaves is actually the interesting part, because that's when people can talk like, what did you really think about that? Or how did you take the way that our manager spoke to the product manager, or something like that. So be open to creating that space organically. I think also just being upfront and asking your peers honestly, again, these kind of subtle ways of offering feedback or seeking feedback. What did you think of that? How are you feeling about that meeting? But also make sure that you are prepared to answer the question honestly yourself, right? So you want to be curious about what your teammates think, but also be prepared to kind of go out on that limb and be offered to answer it as well. Because that can also create trust that can make it easier to offer and share feedback in the future. So I would say invite feedback in an organic increments so that you and your peers can improve how you work day over day. If you are interested in starting a culture of feedback at your workplace, if there is no culture of feedback to begin with, or maybe there is one on paper but not one in action, that I think is really noble and it really speaks to me. And so this was one thing that I really wanted to speak about tonight is if you feel like the only one in your group or department that actually wants feedback or cares about that type of growth, um, I would say with the people around you, start with gratitude and praise. This is something that you can do with your peers, but also the people above you if you want, thanking them for being kind or helpful or impactful in some way, and then telling them what they did that was impactful to you. Um, Gratitude and praise is also easier to hear. So if you're in a maybe a lower trust or a lower psychological safety space, finding things to be grateful for, sincere gratitude, right? We don't want to be giving praise where no praise is due. But if somebody actually really did something that was noteworthy that you really wanted to give them that positive feedback for, I think that's a great place to start and make a habit of it. Um, Making sure that you actively elicit feedback, signaling that you are open to feedback and you want to hear it. Do you have any feedback for me? And then acting on it. Like I said before, you don't have to act on every piece of feedback, but the idea here is that you want to hear this feedback sincerely and that you do seek input on how to grow and improve. So we've talked about this a little bit, subtle ways to seek feedback, right? Asking people how they're feeling, are you thinking about something, that kind of thing. I'm going to go to the Menti for a second because I feel like somebody posted something that I wanted to speak about in this. I think it was the heated project discussions and the because then there was another one that was about like emotional response, right? So I think some of these ways can be that like minimum viable feedback, right? So if otherwise, you know, giving like larger, more meaningful feedback might not land with that person or those people, something little like this still matters and can start to chip away at that lack of trust and grow something better. That's what I hope for you. Okay, let's wrap up. So, feedback, we should see it as a gift given between people that can help people at all levels improve their work and their interactions. Quality, actionable feedback can be hard to give, but it is worth the short term friction that it can cause. And it can actually help build trust. And then it is less, if you feel less friction in the future. The best kind of feedback that you can offer includes the context, the actual action, and then the outcome of that. So SBI feedback. You can plant the seed of a culture of feedback by offering thanks and praise in the SBI format to people around you and also above or below you. And then you can water the seed by asking for others for feedback often. Thank you. That's my presentation on feedback in motion. Thank you very much for listening.